What I'm going to talk to you guys about today is the way that we're going to build the supporting ideas for our next critical paper. So first of all, you need to make sure that you've reviewed all the comments that I've made about your essays to this point. So go back in and check on all those comments on your themes, on your literary devices, on your critical inquiry questions. Make sure that you kind of understand what all of those are saying. Now, the next thing we've got to understand is the objective, again, of this particular paper. Since we're writing this basically with the premise that we're justifying the inclusion of this paper in the curriculum for next year, or arguing that it shouldn't be included, basically any major part of the book is fair game for a supporting idea. We just have to argue it within that framework of, would this be good for this class? And we'll be able to use our outside judgment as we apply it in that direction. Now, if you guys remember, there were several things on the writing assignment page itself that indicated sort of here's what you're looking for when we talk about the curriculum here in English 4 or in English 3. So you can either do one of these, understand ways authors create meaning through literary elements and devices, consider the text themes and critically judge them. If you're English 3, consider how England shaped these themes, or consider how or if it's English 4, consider how whatever culture it came from shaped these themes. So that basically gives us kind of 4 potential options that we would be able to do when we were coming up with supporting ideas. Number 1, we could talk basically about the theme's value to students, essentially. So for this, you might have a paragraph that essentially talked about whatever theme you were dealing with and how it was important that students get this, why it was valuable for them to learn this, or perhaps valuable for them to not learn it, perhaps valuable for them to combat that in their own character development. So if we look at this example of Ivan Denisovich right here, humans can survive even extreme oppression, but at the cost of radically altering their character and shrinking their worldview. Well, we might be able to articulate a theme somewhere around that. Perhaps something for Ivan Denisovich, we could say the theme about survival in extreme conditions, altering people's character, can help students understand trauma in their own lives or in their communities. So we would perhaps be able to apply this not just to the situations that Ivan Denisovich underwent, but any sort of extreme oppression or any sort of extreme trauma. So perhaps we would argue that it's valuable for students to learn about that. So another way that we could build a supporting idea would be by prioritizing the literary elements. So basically, that these literary elements or literary devices are particularly valuable for the students to learn in English 4. So if we were going to talk about Ivan Denisovich, if you guys remember, we went through and talked about several of the LDs for this, especially the idea around flashback and character development for him. We could talk about the the novel's structure is unconventional, emphasizes flashbacks to show how Ivan's character has developed, creating an unusual emphasis on time and, we'll say time in the plot line. So I could basically write a paragraph saying that these flashbacks are valuable enough in this book to merit study. You know, basically if I were going to think of this as a teacher, if I'm thinking of myself as the teacher here, I could go ahead and say, I'll teach flashback by teaching this book right here. And you could argue basically the same if you had a strong literary element or device for your book. Now, the next one that we could do could have to do with our critical inquiry. So if we've come up with a good critical inquiry question, we can basically use that and argue that its potential for discussion, its potential answers that we might be able to plumb into would be worthwhile for inclusion. So if you guys remember, some of our critical questions that we had in Ivan Denisovich was essentially, is survival worth it if it comes at such a cost, or would a resistance be more important? So I might have a critical inquiry question if I would turn it into a supporting idea that looked like this. The question of surviving at such cost instead of resisting and dying for it and dying nobly would be, or we'll say would generate valuable discussion. And essentially, we would be able in our supporting idea question, our supporting idea paragraph for this question, to talk about the potential lines that people would go to answer this in either direction, and even hint at which one we think the author perhaps would agree with himself. Now, the last one that we might deal with, and we haven't done any work to prep for this right here, would be to talk about historical context. So again, on those options that you could do right here, we could talk about what's the history that comes into this particular one, and how does that history shape the value of the text. So obviously with this one, we get to talk about a very distinct historical time period and phenomenon. We can talk about the USSR's gulags. We can talk about this as a supporting idea like this. The Soviet Gulag system demonstrates the extreme nature of communism and we'll say the clashes, its official outlook, and the experiences of the people living under its totalitarian rule. Now, here's the important thing. All of these would be good supporting ideas. None of them have to be included to make this whole thing work. Literally, if you have one theme supporting idea, one LE supporting idea, one critical inquiry supporting idea, that's a fine combination. You might find out that there are 2 or 3 LE or LD ones that you might want to include. You could do 2 LEs and 1 theme. You could do 1 theme and 1 critical inquiry and 1 historical context. You could do 2 historical contexts, 2 critical inquiry. It doesn't matter. Literally, these are just the options that are available to you. You can basically go through and think, what are all the different strengths that I, again, would be able to argue in favor of my novel for or against my novel for? And then let me actually play to those rather than simply try to just go down the line and fill them out or anything. So use your own kind of comfort with the text and your own desires of what you want to talk about. Obviously, each one of these paragraphs would kind of draw on a different strength. You know your theme well, you know your LEs well, you can do the critical inquiry process well, you can do some historical research on this well. You can use that to kind of guide what your choices are going to be. So let's have one more practice here, this time with the Death of Arthur example text that we've been dealing with. So this one I'm going to do again as if I'm just putting this together with just 3 supporting ideas, and this time I'm not going to necessarily go through literally all of them. And I can do them kind of in a different order. So for instance, I might start this one arguing that yes, we should have Le Morte d'Arthur in our curriculum, by talking about the historical context in a supporting idea. I can talk about knights and the code of chivalry were very important formative ideas in the West, and they affected Romantic literature greatly. So it is important to understand what they looked like in their native setting. their native literatures. Okay, so I could argue basically that this book really shows me chivalry and knighthood very, very well in this paragraph. After that, I might talk again about the literary element or literary device that I like most in this one, which is irony. The text demonstrates irony very effectively when showing chivalry's twisted nature, when bad knights, we'll just do this, bad knights we'll say when bad knights act chivalrously for evil purposes, and good knights violate chivalry for good reasons. So that irony aspect I would be able to talk about, and again explain how it's very thoroughly demonstrated in the book. And then perhaps last, I would talk about the critical question that I came up with for this one. And that had to do with the ideals. Should we try to live up to an ideal if we know that it's doomed? Living up to impossible ideals is very important for people to answer and apply to moral systems of today, such as we again could say religion or moral philosophy. This is one of the important things I was trying to emphasize for a lot of folks in your critical inquiry questions too. Make sure you're trying to see how it applies to today. Make sure you can kind of say it's like this is the specific area of life or area of modern society where we can see this being very important, being very key. Now, and again, you can make this look like anything that you want. These are just, again, kind of your 4 basic options, and you can mix and match them however you'd like. I'm going to have these up here. This area, this thing is up under the writing assignments, or sorry, it's under the resources tab. Scroll on down to the bottom, you'll see critical inquiry supporting ideas, so you can review it at your own leisure. Please spend some time working on this today and tomorrow, and you'll be sharing this as well with your partners so that you can get some comments with each other going back and forth. If you have any questions at all with this, please reach out to me.